Good evening. This is Cadillac Jim. It's the Thursday night Cadillac Conversations. Bruce can't be with us tonight. He is on business travel. He did check in by cell phone for a few seconds, but had to go. He may drop in on the cell phone or may not. Air Mike may join us. In the meantime, we can talk about all things Cadillac. I have discovered that where I've been hanging out during business hours lately, people have gradually figured out that there's a CTSV in the parking lot, and even more, people have figured out it's mine. And I get a lot of kidding about it, a lot of respect. Even a guy with a supercharged Ford Mustang that he sort of put together himself, we have sometimes conversations. But it turns out a lot of people around there have performance cars of different types. And in the process of commuting, a 40-mile commute for almost a year now, that I've seen quite a few sites. There's a Tesla Model S that I've seen a number of times. The most amazing thing about it, of course, is that it has no tailpipes. No tailpipes at all. And I've learned that the culture on the freeway, give gap, take gap, devil be damned. If I'm not following you so close you can't see my license plate, well, then you're not on the radar. These kind of things happen during the peak of rush hour, but you rarely see them if you're early or late. So my solution has been to be early. I also find out that there are prime parking places I can get that way. And I've been upping the career gas mileage of my CTSV with a light foot on the freeway, even though the freeway speeds are a little bit, during rush hour, a little bit faster than I would normally travel on my own devices. But it seems to be, I'm putting quite a bit of miles, spinning up the odometer quite a bit on the car, and to my amazement, it's turned out to be just about the most reliable car I've ever had. I've had some problems with the telephone letting go when I hang up, and sometimes when I get an incoming call, I don't get the touch screen pick up or ignore. I have to push the black OnStar button to pick up, even if it's Bluetooth. But that seems to be getting better for some reason. I don't know. I do understand that Cadillac does upgrade their software occasionally over the comlink from the cell phone, the cell towers, through the cell towers. And they do it by serial number. They can interrogate your software version numbers and so forth. And they don't do it, all of it for everybody, because there's too much bandwidth involved. But if they see to solve a problem, they will do it. Another reason they probably don't do everybody all the time is because there's a certain amount of risk of bricking your radio or infotainment center if anytime they do that. In the later model cars, the central computer for the network is the radio module, or the dashboard part of it at any rate. The RF part's still on the back seat in most cars, but that used to be just one of the radio modules had the controls and some of the hookups and the network connection in the front, but the radio integration module in the rear was in the rear, and it interrupted the path from the radio to the speakers, so that OnStar could take over the speakers. And I think that's still true. But the module in the front has replaced the dash integration module as the principal or the home module for the car, the server for the network, so to speak, on your car. At any rate, the only thing I've had to do is I bought tires about a year and a half ago, and I bought Goodyear four-season tires, all-season tires, just about the time 3 or 4 people were coming out with all-season tires for the V's. And I've been very happy with the performance, and I'm happy with their performance in snow. and they seem to be fairly good rain tires. Although the first time I ventured out in the heavy rain for a high-speed commute, I was thinking, well, Michelin's might be better, but in point of fact, I got no complaints. The You'd think with those big wide tire patches, there'd be a tendency to aquaplane, but I haven't seen it. I haven't gone begging for it either, but it seems to be a very nice daily driver. And I've ridden in some friends' grocery getter cars, and my car rides better than a lot of cars out there that are nothing special. So it's not like the V suspension is that tough. And I've added several. You get a warning on the dashboard that the washer fluid is low. It will take a gallon. You still can't see any, but so I just pour in a gallon and then I wait till I get the message again. It won't go much further before it goes dry. So when I get that message, I immediately go home, pour a gallon in it. I buy the washer fluid at the parts store for about $2 a gallon. So rather than pay $2.50 a quart at the filling station or whatever they charge, it's not that bad, but it's considerably more expensive. Also, there are lots of you can pay as much as you want for windshield washer fluid. It's kind of like audio cables. You can pay $100 for a cable you can get for $6.95 that performs just as well. An HDMI 8-foot cable or whatever. It's very easy to pay through the nose for those things. But a cable is a cable is a cable, and if it meets spec and doesn't have problems with a noisy excuse me, a noisy connection, it's as good as $1 million cable. So I've even seen articles about that in the news and the blogs. So the washer fluid, if it meets GM specs, it meets GM specs. Excuse me. I'm going to blank the video for a second, and if you'll excuse me. Probably should have blanked the audio. At any rate, my favorite topic is tires, but I've talked enough about tires lately. I will talk a little bit about vehicle dynamics. One of the things about keeping traction under stress is keeping the compliance at the suspension as high as possible. This means that a really stiff suspension, a stiff ride, may be good for keeping the car flat if the roll centers and the roll axis don't are too far from the center of gravity. But in point of fact, you'll tend to send waves through the rubber whenever you hit a bump or a pothole or any irregularity, and this reduces the ultimate traction of the tire when that happens. So it's better to have the suspension take up a bump. When you change tires, you take a little bit of risk in decreasing performance, because the way that it's done is that particularly in a very ultra high performance car like a CTSV or any of the V series, and probably the V Sports, the response to the tire to irregularity is part of the computer modeling of the suspension. And so the unsprung weight in the wheel is part of the equation. And all of this works together with the damping of the shocks, and it's all programmed into your body control module, so that if your tire has a different compliance than what is expected within the compensation of the shock absorbers, won't do as much good at compensating for it. But it appears that the tires I've got are close enough to the OEM Michelin's Pilot Sport specials for this car that the performance is acceptable. I have gotten over 1G several times on right turns, and I've approached it on left turns, and I've made no attempt to do so. It's just normal driving. usually, of course, on a right turn. There's a sharp right turn on the way to work as I get off the freeway. And I've hit over 1G there several times in the last few months. Last year, I did it once on the way to the drugstore, turning in the driveway, pulling out of traffic where I was being tailgated and then hooking a right at the driveway. And so I read on one of the car and driver reports, they had done a review of the ATS-V the month before. And there was a lot of hue and cry in the letters column about people saying, "Are you sure this is right?" And they give the 0 to 60 time and the quarter mile times, and then they talk about the slalom times and the 3 or 4 people I asked, and so, one guy was fairly elaborate. He said the straight line times, 0 to 62, and the eighth mile, quarter mile times were all about the same as a Lamborghini. Are you sure this is right for an ATS-V? And the editor's response was, well, the power, straight line performance is about the same as the Lamborghini, but the skid pad and slalom numbers are considerably better. The max skid pad acceleration was well over 1G. I don't remember exactly how much, but I think it was close to 1.2G. I don't think my car would do that, but the matching of the bouncing of the wheels on the tires and the matching of the ripple of the tires with bumps and compensating for that with action of the shocks. All of this is just part of the equation. The V also has a plate under the part of the chassis to increase the chassis stiffness and suspension stiffness. There are braces under the hood, a tower-to-tower brace, and braces to the firewall, in addition, that you don't see on the regular ATS or CTS, and the things in the rear also. I once remarked when we were talking about whether the platform really needed to be a Cadillac-specific platform with Bruce, and I pointed out that on the EK platform that, I drove the 97 ETC for 15 years, and that platform had both the rear suspension on a subframe, which is mounted through rubber biscuits to the main frame, and the cradle. The suspension and engine were on the cradle, which is mounted to the unibody with rubber biscuits. And this provided a method of getting very good compliance and very solid engine mounting without coupling engine vibration and road noise through the suspension into the body, or at least reducing it considerably in both the front and the rear. And you didn't see that in Buicks, Oldsmobiles, Pontiacs, or Chevrolets. So this is kind of the kind of feature in a platform that makes a Cadillac a Cadillac. And so I feel like a Cadillac-specific platform can and often does have things like that. But a platform that must be shared with a brand that has a fundamentally different price point may or may not be able to offer that same platform and meet the price point. So this, again, is another set of equations in the chassis dynamics, along with the chassis rigidity, which is different for the V series than for the regular CTS and ATS. So the chassis dynamics is apparently where Cadillac is leading the world right now, with cars that you can go down and buy, albeit at a price. I don't believe that you're going to get the dynamics of a V without getting a V Sport or a V, because some of these things are modifications of the platform for the V Sport and the V. But if that degree of attention is paid to the platform, you're going to get whatever the platform can offer without the additional hardware for the V series on it, or the V Sport series. So this basically gives, if it's almost free once they've got the dynamics down for the V and V Sport and V, to provide the best possible performance and ride for the ATS and the CTS. Complain about the ride or handling of an ATS or CTS with any powertrain, be sure and make a note on the Caddy Info chat. I made a mistake in naming the chat tonight. I used an '07 instead of an '08 because I took advantage of the autofill to stick in the date, and then I just changed the day, and I forgot to change the month. So hopefully Bruce can change that when he gets back. I'll send him a PM, make sure he knows that I did it, so he'll look. He's on travel, so it'd be nice if he could get to that before he got back from travel. And I'm sure he'll have a laptop where he's going. It is business travel, and I'm sure he just doesn't walk around with an open neck alligator shirt in his hands in his pockets when he goes on business. So I expect that he'll be able to sysop a manner title change from his destination. I was hoping Air Mike would drop in before too long. We're supposed to go a half hour, and if Air Mike doesn't get here, we may not make that. I can, I did not prepare questions or topics, so I can only retain the ability to provide an interesting monologue for so long without malice aforethought. And my malice aforethought has been on things that in my daytime life that are of little interest to most Caddy Info people. And so therefore I have not gotten my head into Cadillac chats. Texas Jim isn't here. He's always good for old stories and new stories. And it's truly amazing what he does when he has his Platinum Edition DeVilles for a while. I complained about not having the ultimate performance out of my Eldorado. The shift's too small, too slow, and so forth. And so the dealer, one time when I came in for service, said, I'd been asking about a chip several times. They said they had reprogrammed my PCM. Well, I didn't notice much when I drove out, but over the next day or so, I noticed that if you weren't careful with the throttle taking off from a stop, and this is on dry concrete in the LA area, you would chirp the tires, which it wasn't doing before. The shift seemed a little crisper, and it seemed to go. Well, I don't think the shifts at Redline I don't really pay that much attention to because I rarely did those. In the LA area, that's like 45 miles an hour, and from a stop, you rarely had that much room. So when I did, and there wasn't anybody around, and I could safely and legally do that. But then I noticed the tachometer would wander around in the red region, but a lot less before it snapped into second. Third gear, sort of out of the question. Third gear is about 80. It comes in about 80, and that's really not feasible in the LA area. It's just barely legal. You get stopped if you go above 80, most any place. So it's not a good idea. So I didn't know much about that shift. There are exceptions. There are highways and the Dakotas and free interstates and the wheat belt or the plains area and so forth, where the going rate's 85 or so. But I didn't go there. I just went to and from work and weekend errands and drives and so forth. This car, I've noticed a difference in personality in the sport mode and the touring mode or the regular driving mode. For one thing, a huge LED display comes up and tells you what gear you're in at all times in the sport mode, even if you leave it in auto. And then you get a choice for a ratchet shifter or a paddle shifter. But I found that if you don't use it for a long time, it will eventually start to shift auto again. I think it's about 30 seconds. And in the manual, it says that if you hold it on the upshift for about 5 seconds, but then it'll go into the auto mode. It won't shift more than once unless you push it more than once. So that's a fairly straightforward way to come out. You can do that with the paddle shifters also. I've also found out that you can use the paddle shifters in touring mode, and it will put the thing and without going to the touring mode. The touring mode gives you about 500 more RPM at the shift points, even at light throttle, and the shifts are firmer. And so there are actually 4 modes of the transmission. The touring mode automatic or normal mode, touring mode manual through the paddle shifters, the sport mode auto, which happens you just shove the shifter to the right, and the sport mode manual, which happens when you use the manual shifter, either with the ratchet shifter or with the paddle shifters. For a total of 4 modes. I rarely use the sport mode and the manual shift mode, but I will say that if you want best control of your performance, that is your mode. If you're in the auto mode, even in the sport mode, the transmission is not going to have the RPM you want if you want a really good throttle response in a given situation. If you wait for it to downshift, you've lost a couple of hundred milliseconds. You really, for instant response, you really do want to go in the sport mode and downshift once or twice to get it up over 4,000 RPM to get best performance. The traction control will take care of stability. If you're thinking about, well, what happens if you're at 40 mile an hour and you go down to second or third gear and rope on it? Well, there are, I think there are 2 traction control modes. It may be just on and off, but if you leave the traction control mode on, it's okay. StabiliTrak has 2 modes. If you hit the traction control button twice within about 5 seconds, it will put the StabiliTrak in so-called track mode. It doesn't quite turn it off. And this is fortunate because I've seen videos of inexperienced drivers with V-Series that will be out on a track and somebody behind them, usually in another V-Series in the videos I've seen, they'll come out of a turn and they'll see a track they want to take and they'll nail it, and the car, they'll violate the laws of traction. You have to trade off traction laterally and longitudinally, and if you don't do that, then you lose the drive wheels. And that's what happened. They go sideways. And StabiliTrak would simply hold them sideways until they came off of it. This is a whole lot better than spinning out or just sliding to a stop. In other words, they didn't seem to lose much speed doing that. I've seen that several times, and not just V-Series. I've seen Corvettes and so forth. So you put it in track mode, it retains a bit of safety. And I used to say on the LA freeway, after seeing, commuting for years and years down there, that there were 4 rules of driving on the freeway. And rule 1 was keep the shiny side up and the rubber side down. If you maintained rule 1, this gave you a chance to observe the other rules. The rule 2 is keep your tire, suspension, brakes, and engine reasonably well maintained and keep gas in the car. Rule 3 is don't do anything crazy, stupid, or illegal. At least not flagrantly crazy, stupid, or illegal. That's a good way anywhere to find yourself where you don't want to be in one metaphor or another. And I forget what rule 4 was. I think those 3 would do you in pretty good stead. One of the things I've been studying lately at work is a part of the system engineering process, and it's the professional and efficient modes of operation and conduct in a professional environment. And it basically means avoid distractions, keep focused on the job, and know what you're going to do and be prepared for the unexpected and have a plan when the unexpected happens. The same rules apply when you're driving, particularly in traffic. over the years with a lot of long distance commuting in LA and where I live now near Philly. I've developed a habit of watching out for other drivers, not just watching out for them to do something that is unexpected and causes a problem, but to watch out for them in terms of being protective, particularly motorcycles. The next highest order priority in terms of protecting other drivers or watching out for them, like when you're following them, make absolutely certain that you have get enough space behind them to where if something happens to them, you can be their rear bumper. The next most important thing to watch is people who drive with their arm out the window. Now, a lot of people want to think they're saving money on air conditioning, or they have one reason or another, they drive with the windows open. And that's very dangerous because what would ordinarily be a scratch on a door can be a crippling injury if your arm is out the window. So you need to watch for that. Third, of course, is children and pets. It's not that I'm so protective of pets that I give them the same leeway as children. It's just that they can be distracted, and if something happens, they can be thrown about the car and cause further loss of control or injury. So the priority is motorcycles, people with arms out the window, and children in the car. No matter what the law, there's a child is going to find a way to be less than constrained legally in a car seat. It just happens too often. So I guess we're pretty much within 5 minutes of our half hour now. So I seem to have done it, talking about commuting, safety, driving Cadillac platforms, and chassis dynamics and what they do for ride and handling for all Cadillacs. And you can't tell me that doesn't trickle down to Buick and other platforms too, because they share some of the platforms. And I haven't mentioned Chevrolet, but Chevrolet has some high-performance platforms. The Camaro, as I understand it, has given up a few trades for styling, such as the larger wheels, which adds to the unsprung weight, and also the overall, the total body weight to deal with how to incorporate the chassis dynamics to get the best performance out of that configuration. But in point of fact, the Camaros are no slouch for chassis dynamics. Of course, there's the Corvette. The Corvette has been the leading edge for chassis dynamics since probably the 50s. I won't say the 53 was, because the 53 to 55 Corvette was based on the 49 to 54 Chevrolet platform. Didn't use the same platform, but it used the same floor pan. It shared suspension components. It did not share suspension components, mounting, and geometry, which is why it was classified as a sports car. The Ford Thunderbirds, the early ones, the nice looking ones, the classics, 55, 56, 57, did not modify the suspension points to move the roll center to provide the handling of a sports car. And after the 56s were out a few months, but then Ford did say in a press release that it was not a sports car. It was a personal car or a luxury car or whatever. And that's all well and good. They're still beautiful cars. And I would be sorely tempted if I had an opportunity to get a hold of one that represented a drivable car with a reasonable investment. But in point of fact, finite element analysis and its impact on quietness and so forth became well known in the 50s. I had a 59 Chevrolet with a so-called jet smooth ride. What they did with that platform, the early X-frame platform, 58 to 62, was to put chassis flexing in with the road response so that it became part of the package for smoothing the ride. Well, this almost completely obviated any possibility of really good handling. I got decent handling out of that car by going to 15-inch wheels and high load factor tires, but I never could get that car to handle very well. There was, but my 69, however, did have decent chassis rigidity, and even though it was a 9-passenger station wagon, it handled fairly well. My 64, which I had tricked out for the drivetrain, I also tricked out the suspension, and I had it handling pretty well. It was in the same heritage as the 59, but it did have more frame in that particular model, Impala station wagon. But it did have a disconcerting habit. Well, the statute of limitations is expired, but at high speed cornering, it would pick up the inside rear wheel. And this would deprive you of power. And I found that irritating. It was a solid axle, Didion tube, not tube, but Didion arm, laterally stabilizer trailing links. Pretty good rear suspension, but still live axle. But nevertheless, the 69 with this, I think the 69 was still live axle, but it was no slouch for handling at all. It was still no sports car, but it would. Of course, I had oversized tires, street Michelins, and 7-inch rims on it, but Corvette rims. The wheels tend to flex too. You got to watch that. We had a fellow that was tricking out a Eldorado for autocross racing, and he moved the roll centers and lowered the car and so forth, and he dropped out when other things happened that slowed down his project, and I haven't heard back. I'd like to check on him because I thought I knew a lot about chassis dynamics, but he had some technical links and discussions that I learned a lot from, and I'd like to see him back. Okay, well, we're at 9 o'clock. And Air Mike hasn't been in. He often checks in late, but he's rarely much later than this. So I'm going to call it an evening. This has been the Thursday night Cadillac Chats from caddyinfo.com. And I'm Cadillac Jim. Had a monologue tonight and signing off.